welcome Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, who famously held up the soup can and the beer can the other day. And I know that the policies evolve and the intent. When you held those up the other day, is that the policy that's announced today, or has it softened to some degree because of pushback from countries like Canada and Mexico?
Well, remember, in my report, I recommended 3 alternative ways of dealing with the problem. One was blanket tariffs, one was more targeted tariffs, and then the third would have been quotas. So this takes some of each of the last 2 of those potential remedies, namely some blanketing and some specific targeting.
Can you tell, what do you mean by the specific, I'm assuming quotas are somewhere in here? I haven't heard any details about that. What is the specific?
No. What I was saying is, in my reports to the president, quotas were one of the alternatives. He discarded that alternative. I was describing that he picked a combination of the other 2. The notion of generally everybody being hit, but coupled with specific exclusions for specific reasons.
Wilbur, just one thought on this.
Larry Kudlow's here too, Wilbur.
Why not?
Hi, Larry. How are you?
Hello, sir. And now my best to Hillary. I was just thinking, okay, you're taking off the tariffs from Mexico and Canada. I approve of that heartily. I think that was great stuff. Why not collect an alliance of NAFTA countries, European countries, Asian countries, and really go after China, which, with respect to aluminum, steel, and lots of other things, including intellectual property rights, you know, Wilbur, they are the biggest unfair traders on the planet. Why not really target these tariffs directly onto China and get some response and negotiation?
Well, here's why, Larry. China has been very clever at transshipping product through other countries and dislodging domestic demand in other countries, which causes their producers to dump on us. If you look at the raw numbers, China is actually shipping us less steel now than they did several years ago. But we know that's not what's really happening. So the reason we have to go on a broader basis is to deal with the problems of transshipment and the problems of displacement. Similarly,
so, Wilbur,
same thing in aluminum.
Just to follow up on that, why, you want selective tariffs? It could be aluminum, it could be steel, it could be other commodities, sir. It could be businesses, lots of transactions. In other words, really hit China with a coalition behind you that will agree. Not just the commodities, but the whole shooting match until they shape up and stop stealing our property rights, for example, our intellectual property rights.
Well, you're certainly right about that, and our hope is that in negotiation with the other countries, part of the basis for potentially releasing others will be them acting in concert with us and them holding down the excess dumping into their markets and the transshipment through their markets. That's why the president made it clear that as long as we get improved national security and economic security, tariffs aren't the only way to do it. But too much time has been spent just talking about steel overcapacity. Very little time has been spent doing anything. We are taking the leadership in steel and in aluminum to deal with this chronic overcapacity problem.
Mr. Secretary Ross, it's Michelle Caruso Cabrera again. You highlight the issue of transshipments. It was our understanding that's why initially there was a desire to impose the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. If you remove them, doesn't that mean that we'll still have a big issue with transshipment? In other words, Chinese steel coming into the U.S. in a different path?
Well, you're assuming that the negotiations with Canada and Mexico don't deal with that problem. That's not a good assumption.
Got it. So you think that could be solved through NAFTA?
Through NAFTA or by separate agreement. The form of what happens isn't so important. What is important is the substance. And the substance has to be to hold down overproduction resulting from overcapacity. That's the target.
Well, but just one, sir. Steel is a national security issue. I get that's the administration's point of view. What if you made a deal with Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. instead of tariffs as penalties, because it disrupts the economy so much? Why not have direct government subsidies for these steel industries right on the budget, maybe the defense budget because it's security? They'd be transparent. Everybody would know about them. You could set them higher or lower. It would be cleaner, Wilbur, and have less harmful economic consequences.
Well, first of all, I don't think what we're doing is going to have such harmful economic consequences. The total tariff, assuming that all the steel and all the aluminum still comes in, which will not happen, some will be restricted because they won't pay the tariff, they'll ship it elsewhere. But if it all came through, you're talking $9 billion a year. In an $18 or $19 trillion economy, that's a half of 1%. So please spare me the idea that this is going to be massively destructive to our economy. The point of holding up that Campbell soup can and the beer can and all that was to illustrate it's a fraction of a penny per can. Those products sell for way over $1 a can. You aren't even going to notice the half a penny in the pricing. All this talk about destruction in the other industries is simply not going to happen.
Mr. Secretary, could you shed a little more light on whether or not we're making progress in the NAFTA renegotiation? The president had sort of a throwaway line at the end there where he seemed to suggest that he was optimistic that we could get a deal. Now, you know, presidents are wont to say that. But the reason I bring it up, coincidence or not, when he made that comment, it was about that time when the market came back again, and we finished up almost 100 points on the Dow. We know that Ambassador Lighthizer come back and given his feedback on what the negotiations look like. We know Jared Kushner had just came back from Mexico. Can you tell us what kind of progress we're seeing right now? Are you optimistic that we're going to see something on NAFTA more so than you were maybe even a few days ago?
Well, I think there's no question that the action the president took today is a further motivation to both Canada and Mexico to make a fair arrangement with the United States. It's pretty clear that that is the case. This is not being done, though, just as a negotiating ploy. We are deadly serious about solving the problem in steel, aluminum, and as the weeks and months go by, other industries. The important thing is solving the problem. The less important thing is the exact mechanism for doing it. But we have to get it done.
Secretary Ross, it's Michelle again. So today you have helped out the producers of aluminum and steel, but the consumers of aluminum and steel are unhappy about this. What would you say to them?
What I'll say to them is notice what is the actual impact. You notice no one has refuted my estimate that the impact on a can of beer is a fraction of a penny, that the impact on a can of soup is a fraction of a penny, the impact on a can of soda, a fraction of a penny, the impact on a car, fraction of 1% of the price. Those are the real numbers. Nobody who has complained has disputed my numbers. Is it really that those companies are living so perilously that a fraction of 1% is going to make them lay off people? I don't believe it for 1 minute.
Wilbur, could I just jump in? I'm sorry to override. We're running out of time, my friend. Just the president mentioned yesterday or the day before a 25% tariff on the imports of European cars. How does that figure now with this proclamation and with the ongoing negotiations? Is that on the drawing board, a 25% tariff on European cars?
Well, as you know, my practice, both when I was in private life and now in public life, is to comment on actual things that are actually going into effect. There are lots of things that we're considering, lots of things that are being worked on. Let's deal with them as they actually come into reality, if and when they do.
Secretary Ross, it's Michelle again. I'm looking at the performance of the steel stocks over the last week. And maybe you're right about the ultimate impact on what it's going to mean on pricing, because they're not performing as if this is a good thing for them. Maybe that wasn't strong enough. I guess I'm trying to square what's happening. The market is telling us one message about what's happened, and yet supposedly this is going to be a great boon for the steel and aluminum industry. The market's not convinced.
Well, first of all, I've spent many years ignoring daily fluctuations in stocks. You really have to look at the longer term. I don't think people have understood or adjusted the true impact of this. But the real impact, in my view, is going to be in volume, not so much in price, because there are some products that will stop coming in as a result of these tariffs. And the benefit to a steel company, and as you know, I was in that business and did very well in it in the old days. The real benefit is getting that extra 1 million tons, because that absorbs only the variable expense of producing it, and it therefore is at a much higher profit margin, even without price increase, than your overall margin on steel. And the exact same thing is true in the aluminum industry. So the real kicker is going to be increased volume. And part of the reason that I think the impact on the consuming industries will be so small is there's going to be fierce competition for getting that incremental volume. So I don't believe the prices will go up even as much as the tariffs.
Mr. Secretary, always a pleasure. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thanks for the
You
good
bet.
questions.
So Wall Street has a slightly different opinion on what the impact to companies would be from these tariffs. And the companies that stand to win, of course, are those that can pass along higher steel costs to their customers by raising prices. Those that stand to lose, well, they have to eat those higher costs in their margins. Goldman Sachs studied several industries, machinery, autos, and building products, to see how they would fare. In the machinery space, Caterpillar should do better because of the strength of their distribution, the firm said, while Terex and Oshkosh may have a tougher time. On the automaker side, those could pass higher input costs to their customers, but that would result in a 1.5% higher selling price, reducing demand by 1%, the firm said. Or they could eat the cost. That would have impacted Ford and GM by about $1 billion each last year, representing 12% and 7% of operating income, respectively. Among building products, Goldman says A.O. Smith, which makes water heaters, and Lennox, which makes HVAC systems, should have stronger pricing power, even though steel makes about 10% of their costs. The firm says Whirlpool's products, however, are more commoditized, making it harder to raise prices. Now, it's important to note that the study was conducted ahead of Trump's announcement in February and assumes a 24% tariff rate. Now, while the authors believe their findings are largely the same given yesterday's news, they note that the specific details of the tariff plan are still in flux, and that could impact some of their numbers and
especially if you have all of these carve-outs that we're now anticipating you could have.
Exactly.
It becomes
really
almost a toothless tariff.
Muddles up the model there.
I mean, obviously, you want to, modernize something that's been in place for 30 years. In our estimation, it's been working. American jobs are at stake, Canadian jobs are at stake. Making a better NAFTA is entirely within reason, and we're working hard to get there.
You know people, he knows people. Can we just do something right now? I've got a pen right here. Do you think we can figure it out?
I find that government deals take a little longer than 10 seconds, but
I hope so.
But we're working through the details.
I know his defense minister very well. It's a very qualified crowd, and I certainly hope you can work it out. If I may say,
go ahead, sir.
Apart from steel and aluminum, I think if we think about tomorrow's industries, this occasions the whole question of trade. The big issue for our countries in trade is not one another. In my judgment, it's China. China is a communist dictatorship, and we're in a sustained economic relationship with a communist dictatorship. What that means is if there are no rules and everybody just makes individual deals, Xi Jinping can bring to bear economic, military, and political power in a combined way that all the rest of us cannot, given the kind of societies we are. So it cedes the advantage in trade, in my judgment, tactically, to the communist dictatorship. So I think some rules-based, NAFTA is for North North America, but I think we need something for Asia as well. Otherwise, the Chinese get to pick off our companies, pick off smaller companies, and we cede the battlefield to them. That's the big thing that's going to determine our children's futures, because half of humanity and half of the world's economy is in that part of the world, and that's true for Canada as well as the United States. So we have that in common. And so sticking up for principle in trade is bigger than just an exchange between the two of us. It has strategic importance for us, and they are an ally of ours after all.
Right. How do you think Canadian negotiators will eventually react to the tariffs? In other words, we heard you get exempted to start as long as indefinitely, as long as you come around on NAFTA. Will they take that as they like being pressured like that, or will it be counterproductive or productive for an eventual agreement to be reached, do you think?
Well, I think the discussion around the steel and aluminum tariffs clearly demonstrate the strength of our relationship. I mean, there's an understanding.
That's one way of looking at it, I guess.
Look, there's an understanding that we trade together, that we're part of an integrated North America. From a security standpoint, I mean, Canadian steel is actually used in Humvees to protect against IEDs for the United States. So we are clearly working together on global issues and on trade. So I think this demonstrates a sense of the relationship, which is, transcends any president and prime minister.
Will it be used for leverage? Will America use that for leverage to get what they want? And because there wasn't a carve-out initially. What about when it was first postulated, where there are going to be no carve-outs? That wasn't an example of the working together between.
Well, it actually, I can't speculate what exactly was originally come up with versus where we are, but I can tell you that I've spoken to Stephen Mnuchin 3 times in the last week, and that just demonstrates our continuing ability to work together. And NAFTA is the same. I mean, it's a negotiation, so obviously we're working to get a better deal. We, from our perspective, see that NAFTA, the trading relationship helps, Americans through jobs, it helps Canadians. So getting to a better arrangement, recognizing a whole host of economic issues that weren't the case 30 years ago, it takes some working together, and we are cautiously optimistic we're going to get there.